Welcome to episode 71 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by a 17-loss guy. It's January 10, 1981. It's a humid Montevideo night, and the Estadio Centenario is hosting a tournament that shouldn't exist, but somehow does. It's the Mundialito, also known as the Copa de Oro, Uruguay's Gold Cup, and in official language at the time, it's framed as the Tournament of the World Champions. 6 teams, 5 of them are world champions. The 6th are the Netherlands, the runners-up from 1974 and 78. And the final, on this day, is Uruguay versus Brazil, a match that already carries a ghost from 1950, the Maracanazo. And then the scoreline goes and does something almost new to history. It repeats itself. Uruguay win 2-1 again. So today we'll do 3 things. We'll explain why this tournament exists at all, the long messy origin story, from a diamond anniversary idea to a FIFA-backed spectacle. We'll walk through the Mundialito itself, the squads, the heat, the red cards, and how friendly became the wrong word. And then we'll place it in its proper frame, the brief Uruguayan zenith of early 1981, and the sharp, almost cool drop that follows later the same year. We start with a somewhat strange part. The Mundialito is not a FIFA World Cup, but is built to feel like one. The seed is planted in the early 1970s, inside Uruguay's football culture, an idea for a celebratory tournament tied to the AUF's 75th anniversary in 1975. 75 is the diamond anniversary, and the initial concept is basically that: a diamond tournament, a showpiece, a statement that Uruguay still belongs on the elite stage. Then the logic evolves into something bigger, because the next irresistible anniversary is global, 50 years since the first World Cup, Uruguay 1930. Also, let us not forget that the Centenario isn't just a stadium, it's an origin point. But Uruguay can't pull this off alone. To get world champions to travel, you need legitimacy, money, and FIFA's blessing. That's where the timeline matters. João Avalanche becomes FIFA president in 1974, and whatever else you think of the era, this is the moment when FIFA becomes more overtly modern in its instincts. Bigger events, more commercial structure, more willingness to make one-off ideas official if they strengthen FIFA's orbit. The Mundialito becomes one of those ideas. By 1980, FIFA is not merely tolerating it, it's effectively granting it official character. But even then, the tournament doesn't land cleanly. The calendar is crowded. Euro 1980, the Moscow Olympics. So the 1980 celebration slips into the turn of the year. The Mundialito begins on December 30, 1980, and it ends on this day, January 10, in 1981. Even the stadium has to be rebuilt for the moment. The Centenario is refurbished. Floodlights are installed and tested. The arena is dressed to look like a world stage again. And then the invites go out to the clubs of nations, to the nations of clubs. Now the guest list and the absence. The concept is simple. Bring together the champions: Uruguay, Italy, West Germany, Argentina, Brazil, England. And then a problem. England decline. The reasons are not romantic. They're practical. Scheduling, domestic commitments, a reluctance to carve out time for an event that sits outside the official competitive calendar. So the organizers pivot to the most credible almost champion in the world, the Netherlands. It's a choice that makes the tournament stronger, not weaker, because those Dutch total football teams of the 70s didn't win the trophy, but they shaped the world's imagination with back-to-back World Cup final losses in 1974 and 78. So that's your field. 5 world champions and 1 world-class substitute. And the question becomes, will they treat it like an exhibition? The Mundialito answers that question almost immediately. Here's the format. 2 groups of 3. Group A, Uruguay, Italy, Netherlands. Group B, Argentina, Brazil, West Germany. Each team plays the other 2 once. Group winners go straight to the final. No third place match. And here's a structural quirk that feels very pre-modern tournament. Because it's a 3-team group, one side can play already knowing it's eliminated, meaning the final match can be played under asymmetric psychological pressure. That matters in the story, because it reveals what football governance learns later. If you want integrity, you don't just manage the rules, you manage the incentives. But now to the football. Group A opens the Mundialito with Uruguay versus the Netherlands on December 30. Uruguay win 2-0, a purposeful, hard-edged opening. It's also a reminder that Uruguay aren't hosting this as nostalgia. They want to win it. And look at who's coaching them. Roque Maspoli, the goalkeeper from 1950, a man who lifted the Maracanazo from inside the net, a World Cup winner, now standing on the touchline, guiding Uruguay through a tournament designed to echo that past. That's not symbolism you can manufacture. It's Uruguay collapsing time on purpose. Next up is Uruguay versus Italy, and this is where the Mundialito stops pretending to be polite. Uruguay backs another 2-0 win, but the scoreline is only half the story. The match has 3 red cards. Uruguay's first goal is a converted penalty by Cascarilla Morales. The Italians protested heavily against the decision, and tempers flare in the minutes that follow, leading to punches, and the Spanish referee Guruzeta sends off Uruguay's Moreira and Italy's Cabrini. 10 minutes before the end, Valdemar Victorino puts the result beyond reach, after which Italy's Marco Tardelli loses his head and severely fouls Ruben Paz, and then Italy is down to 9 men. So much for friendly. This isn't men jogging through a commemorative fixture. This is professional pride, the national memory attached. Italy are physical and resentful. Uruguay are stubborn and sharp, and the Centenario crowd is not applauding good intentions. It's demanding dominance. But Uruguay has qualified for the final. Now Group B, and the tournament's other temperature, glamour and violence in equal measure. The first match is Argentina versus West Germany on New Year's Day 1981. The reigning World Cup winners versus the reigning European champions. 10 years later, these two will have met in 2 consecutive World Cup finals, 1986 and 90. So this is top-shelf drama. The pre-match detail is extraordinary. West Germany arrive unbeaten in 23 matches since their exit from the 1978 World Cup, when Jupp Derwall took over from Helmut Schön. Die Mannschaft is riding the momentum of winning the Euro just a few months earlier. Horst Hrubesch, the giant centre forward, scores right before halftime to give the West Germans a 1-0 lead. It looks like they'll run away with it, but an own goal by Manfred Kals in the 85th minute gives Argentina a win, and Ramon Diaz scores the winner in the 88th minute. The Mundialito has produced its first shock and Germany's first loss under Derwall. Next is a match that's always top billing, Brazil versus Argentina, the record 3-time winners of the World Cup versus the reigning champions. It ends 1-1, and there's a young presence in this tournament that changes the feel of every photograph, Diego Armando Maradona. He's not yet a World Cup winner, but he's already a gravitational field. Every match becomes partly about how you survive him. The draw sets up a brutal final group match, Brazil versus West Germany. Klaus Allofs scores to put the Germans ahead, but Brazil responds quickly and then takes command and wins 4-1. West Germany had come in unbeaten in 23 matches, and they leave having lost twice. It is one of those outcomes that feels wrong when you say it out loud, because West Germany is supposed to be the team that never wastes a tournament. But the Mundialito is strange that way. It's short, it's intense, and it doesn't give you time to correct a bad day. Brazil qualified for the final, and now the Mundialito becomes what it was always designed to become, Uruguay versus Brazil at the Centenario on this day, January 10, in 1981. Before the match even starts, the tournament tightens its grip on history. The ceremonial kickoff is performed by Ernesto Mascheroni, a surviving starter from Uruguay's 1930 World Cup winning team. So the timeline is complete. 1930, present in the stadium. 1950, present on the touchline. And 1981, present on the pitch. And the match itself is not slow. It's tense, technical, and spiked with emotion. It's goalless at the break, just like the Maracanazo in 1950. And, just like then, the Mundialito final's first goal is scored early in the second half, but this time it's Uruguay who scores first, by Jorge Barrios. That detail matters because Barrios wasn't even supposed to be the central figure of the final. He comes into the match after an early injury to De La Peña, and then writes his name into the tournament anyway. And the parallel to 1950 is striking. At the Maracanazo's first goal was scored by Friasa, another unsung hero about whom we talked about in episode 61, and I highly recommend listening to that episode again. But back to the Mundialito final. Brazil equalized through Socrates from the penalty spot. And then comes the decisive moment, 10 minutes from the final whistle. Valdemar Victorino, a header, a goal made of timing and hunger, the kind of finish that doesn't ask permission. Uruguay win 2-1, again, not by copying 1950, but by reactivating it, by making Brazil the final opponent, by winning the same way that Uruguay always wanted to believe they could win, through stubbornness, opportunism, and a stadium that turns pressure into oxygen. The Mundialito ends with Uruguay holding a trophy that claims to crown them as champions of champions. And for a moment it feels like Uruguayan football is not just alive, it's restored. Now the zenith, because the Mundialito is not only the Uruguayan peak in that stretch. A few weeks later, Nacional win the Intercontinental Cup against Nottingham Forest in Tokyo, and Victorino, the scorer of Uruguay's winning goal on this day in 1981, is also a central figure in that club triumph. So early 1981 produces something rare for a small football nation, a national team crown in a tournament of world champions, and a club world title short after. It feels like a complete statement. Uruguay have found their old voice again, Celeste and clubs, together. And then football does what it always does. It removes the ground under your feet. Because later that same year, Uruguay's national team come crashing back to earth in the 1982 World Cup qualifiers. They lose 1-2 at home to Peru on August 23rd, and then they go to Lima and draw 0-0 shortly after, a result that seals elimination from the World Cup in Spain. From champions of champions to missing the World Cup within the same calendar year. That contrast is part of the Mundialito's truth. It is both a peak and a reminder that football does not guarantee continuity, even when history is on your side. So where does that leave the Mundialito in the wider football ecosystem? It sits in an awkward category, the small World Cups, prestige tournaments that are not official major championships, but still carry real weight because the participants are elite. You've seen versions of this before. The Taça de Nações, and sorry for butchering Portuguese here, in 1964, a high-end invitational that briefly looks like a world gathering in miniature. The Tournoi de France in 1997, another attempt to stage a concentrated elite tournament in a friendly window, with major sides treating it as more a warm-up. And now, of course, you have the FIFA Confederations Cup, a tournament that eventually becomes FIFA official mini world event, and then fades as the calendar and commercial gravity shifts elsewhere. Because the modern world leaves less room for this category. International football now has its own hard architecture, qualifiers, regional championships, nations leagues, expanded tournaments, title windows. And club football has expanded aggressively into the space that used to be available. Bigger continental competitions, more matches, more travel, more commercial obligation. So the Mundialito ends up feeling like a relic from a different era, when you could still build a major international event around invitation and prestige, rather than a permanent competitive ladder. Which is why it remains so fascinating, because it isn't just an event, it's a snapshot of football's calendar before it became fully colonized. So what should we take away from this? 3 points. First, the Mundialito is proof that football history doesn't live only in official trophies. Sometimes the most revealing events are the ones that exist because people wanted them to exist, because memory needed a stage. Second, friendly is a word that often collapses under pressure. Uruguay versus Italy had 3 red cards. Uruguay versus Brazil ended 2-1, and the stadium treated it like a referendum on identity. This wasn't training, this was status. And third, the Mundialito is a signpost in the evolution of football's calendar, a time when nations could still assemble a mini World Cup on prestige alone before the modern schedule made that almost impossible. On this day in 1981, Uruguay didn't just win a tournament, they briefly re-entered the limelight as if the 20th century had folded in on itself, 1930, 1950, 1981, all living in the same stadium. And then, later that year, football reminded them what it always reminds everyone. Nothing lasts unless you keep winning. That's all for episode 71 of OTD, Mundialito, Uruguay, Brazil, and the night the Centenario replayed history. If you have stories about the Mundialito, if you grew up with it as a family folklore, the forgotten World Cup, email me at otd@17lawsguide.com. Tips and corrections are always welcome. And please rate us 5 stars. Subscribe and tell a friend. Daily podcasts don't climb on their own. Tomorrow in episode 72, we go to January 11, 2007. David Beckham, Real Madrid, LA Galaxy, and the shock announcement that foreshadowed football's next commercial era. You don't want to miss it.